we've heard Mac Jones. We heard, I think it was Andrew Callahan on Brian Barrett's podcast saying that Mac Jones was indeed one of the players in that locker room talking about how the defenses are calling out their plays. I felt like that was a call for help. Yesterday, a lot has been made up about the timing of the passing game. We've talked to Dan Orlovsky. They're starting to ask these questions now to Bill Belichick, to Mac Jones. Well, yesterday they asked him about that route development compared to last year. This was Mac Jones' answer.
I wouldn't make comparisons, just two different offenses and different coaches, different players. So we're doing some similar things, which is really good, and every offense is different, right? So you watch another team, their quarterback's feet might be a little different than where it matches up with us. So it's just specific to us, and I think we're really doing a good job there for the most part. In practice is where it starts. Like I said, the only way you can tell is through full speed reps. So we've gotten a lot of those, obviously, in training camp and in the spring too. So just going back on those reps that we've had and making sure that everything times up.
Two different offenses, different coaches. Again, is this, I said it to Tom, too, at the time, but is this Mac just sort of trying to get to the media and the fan base to let them know, like, dude, everything is different. Everything is different.
You know how I heard that? Because he says it's two different offenses, different players, different coaches. I don't know if he even completely intended it this way, but I heard it as, it's not me. Like, it's not me. Yeah. The timing of everything, like, everything is off. And I'm off, too. Like, I'll admit it. I'm off, too. I'm throwing interceptions. I don't look good. I hate it. But, like, look at everything around me. All you have to do is see how out of sync everything is. And Dan Orlovsky, our buddy on ESPN, has been, like, harping on it the last 24 hours nonstop, including on our show. And so I hear that, and I go, yeah, it is. I agree. I don't think it's that many different players. I don't agree with that. But it is two different offenses. One of them worked, this to an extent. This one doesn't. Two different coaches. One of them was highly skilled and experienced on the offense. This one isn't. And so I agree with him. I don't know if you heard it that way, Arcand.
Yeah, I did. I think that it's clear that what's happening with Mac Jones this year, whether he's regressing somewhat on his own with the injury, I think there's, still some of that maybe lingering a bit. But you look at everything, the total package right now, we're halfway through the year. And this team is still trying to figure out training camp stuff.
Yeah.
And that's ridiculous for a Bill Belichick coach team. I don't care who the coordinators are. Like, you're the all-time great. You can't have that going on right now. And there's been other times we're on to Cincinnati. That offense wasn't working for the first month of the year. We're 2 months into this and change. That's way too deep into a season to still have these problems, even with an extra week. Like, I just think that, that's one of those things where eventually you hit the point of no return. And I wonder if Mac thinks that he's there yet.
And I'm so glad that Tom Curran, when we talked to him about a half hour ago, he brought up 2018 and that the changes that were made, because I've heard some people cite that across this season, the changes that were made in the offense then when it was Tom Brady and Josh McDaniels were tweaks that they made and focusing a little bit more on the running game. It was mid-season tweaks, which you expect good and experienced teams with good and experienced coaches to do to get things rolling better. We're not talking about tweaks here. Like, you can't even compare the two in my book because you're just in such drastically different situations.
Yeah.
Like, one of them is like you're running a marathon and at the 13 mile you're like, "Oh, I'm 10 seconds off of my goal time." And the other one is like, I'm an hour 30 off my goal time and I'm walking half the miles now. Like, it's not the same thing at all. And so I don't totally know what people expect coming out of the bye, but I just agree with Max saying, like, look at what's happening all around me. It's not me.
Yeah, I feel like this offense isn't going to progress until, like, week 18.
Great.
You know what I mean? I mean, seriously, you're like week 9, going into week 11, you had the bye week and everything, but it's like, we're still working on things. We're still progressing. We're still getting better. And maybe that's exactly what this year is. I have no idea. It's 18 games to work on something, an 18-game camp for next year.
That sucks then. I'm sorry. That really sucks because that's what loser teams do. That's what the Lions were talking about
we win
last
as many
year.
as we can
we
while
almost
we do it.
won a couple down the stretch. We won a game or two. Like, that's what loser teams do.
Yeah.
That's how they rationalize a bad season. I don't want that to come to that.
Well, yeah, it's sort of like, okay, let's play some defense, and while we learn and get ready for next year, we'll still win a couple of games. I don't know about you, Arcand, but I know, like, in the offseason when the whole offensive coordinators with Patricia and Judge came up, and I know you were doing radio over on the other side, but How many times did you hear people say, it's not going to make a difference? You know why? Because it's still Bill Belichick's offense. It's still going to run Bill Belichick's offense. And again, now I think that it's failing. Like, Patriot fans are distancing Bill from the offensive game plan.
That's exactly what they're
because
doing.
it's not working, and it can't be Bill's fault. But I put it on him. I don't think these two guys, I don't think he delegated, like Phil Perry said the other day in that podcast, to say, okay, Joe and Matt, I trust you. Run your offense and let me know what you come up with. And we'll do it on Sunday. No big deal. No, I think he's highly involved. And the failure of this offense and the lack of any kind of deception falls on his lap as much as it does the other guys.
Yeah, I would say you have to. And he basically told us to. Didn't Bill Belichick come out and say whatever happens this year is on me? Whatever we do, offense, defense, all that stuff, it's on me.
Yeah, but that's using himself
That's
as
a
a big
cop-out.
meat shield because he
It
knows
is.
nobody's ever going to do anything to him because of the incredible resume that he has.
That's a fine resume that he has. That's fine. But you're also having a Pro Bowl quarterback in his second year regress. The offense is completely lost 2 months into the season. These two guys that you hired, at first, you're right, Lou. Everyone was just ripping on Judge and ripping on Patricia all the time. We're now sort of seeing like these guys they weren't set up to succeed here. And who set them up for failure? It was Belichick. I mean, that's really what it is. So I think it's easy to sort of blame Bill for this. I think it's easy to look at it and say, okay, you don't want coordinators, you don't want people questioning, you don't want anybody other than yes men all around here who owe you their careers and who don't cost anything either, by the way, because they're still getting paid by their own team. Fine, you got all that. It's everything you ever wanted, Bill, and the team kind of blows. They're in last place in the division.
And to Mego's point, when he even said that, it's all on, if it goes well, whatever. If it goes bad, blame me. Like,
Bill Belichick.
Yeah, and being held accountable for it. And I remember even when he made that statement, we came back and I was like, what does that even mean? Like, let's say to come back and after the bye, it continues to look like this offense continues to look like it for 8 weeks. And the offensive coaches are a complete failure. And at the end of the year, they say, Bill, you said to blame you for the failures of this offense, so we're going to blame you. And he looks at you and he's like, okay. Have a good winter, everybody. Or good summer. I'll see you guys next year. Like,
I'll be in Cabo.
Okay. Like, you blame me? Okay. Bye. And
Maybe
people are sitting there
we
going,
could take notes this time and just say that I'm responsible for all of it,
Yeah.
right? Which is what I've said from day one. What I continue to say, there hasn't been any change in that. I'm responsible for what is called, what's done on the field.
and people sit there and say, well, they're 5-4. You act like they're 1-8 or something. And it's like, no, well, here's the thing. If you do have the defense that you have, and you do get a spark from the special teams that you're getting, and the only reason why you're 5-4, 8-9, and 9-8, and then maybe not 11-6, is because your offense is so freaking bad,
Right.
and I'm supposed to blame you for it. But there's really no accountability other than I blame you. Okay, we done here?
And Lou, going back to the starting point, look, where you said about this being possibly an 18-week training camp after training camp,
Yeah.
and then Arcand, you say that's what crappy teams do. Like, if that was the case, if it was all pushing it towards next year, and what we were seeing was them extremely dedicated to a specific system that has a future on offense, it might even be a different conversation. It wouldn't be great to watch, but if you at least saw some progress.
Yeah.
So instead, you see, I believe, because of the system that he's forced into and the coordinator that he's under, your quarterback regressing. You see it getting worse week to week. It's like, it's not like you can look at it and go, well, it's training camp-ish. You know, by week 16, you're going to have a functional offense and some fun things to look forward to once you have money to play with in January. You don't see any indication of that.
They were a playoff team last year.
Right.
What playoff team the next year decides to have an 18-week-long training camp?
I
Like,
know.
that's ridiculous. You had a Pro Bowl quarterback, right? I mean, he wasn't really, but he was. Second year, you were a playoff team last year, and now we're talking about, what, a bridge year? A bridge year for the Patriots.
Oh, there's no
don't
question.
blame it on me, Christian.
Yeah, there's no question. That fits for you, too. There's no question.
Sorry, Bill.
It is. And if you remember, Mego, when the season started, Arcand, we said, what's a successful season to you? And people say, they got to make the playoffs. They got to win a playoff game.
Win a playoff game.
And for me, it was like, I still thought they were going to win 7 games. And I was like, I want it to look good the last 3 or 4 or 5 weeks. If they are implementing something different, to your point, Mego, and the last 4 or 5 weeks, it might look really ugly the first half of the season, but in the second half of the season, if the zone blocking scheme is working, if guys are running around left and right, and it truly looked like a Shanahan offense, or what McDaniel's gotten down in Miami, and, going into the year, at the end of the year, you won 2 out of 4, but still the offense, because of schedule stuff, the offense looked like it was taking another step, like very dangerous offense going into next year. I would say that's a successful season, whatever your record is. And we could still get there because they got 8 games left. But boy, there's going to be some drastic changes for you to start feeling good about this offensive scheme going into next year. All right, when we come back, I missed it last night. Matt Hasselbeck was on with Christian throughout his whole crusade for a cure. He was on with Mutt and I believe Dakota. He called in, had some very interesting things to say about Mac Jones and the coaching that he is receiving. You'll hear that next. All right, so the New England Patriots getting ready to take on the Jets, and we'll see which New York Jets show up. More importantly, which Zach Wilson show up. But it is a bye week. As we mentioned, Mac Jones spoke yesterday. I want to play the answer here from Karen Garrigian asked Mac Jones what he's encouraged by with the adjustments made by the staff during his bye week. That's what Mac had to say.
Yeah, I think every staff around the league, at any league, they're working through things during the bye week, and you obviously
Wait, can
have
we pause it for a second?
What happened?
Mac, any league, in the league, any league? Can we just talk about the NFL? Like, we're not asking about other leagues. I think you know that.
The CFL,
Any league.
And really, what
Arena
kind of adjustments?
We can control those things, and if we can control it, then we need to take control of it.
Still one of the great quotes. Like MLB All-Star break.
Okay, sorry.
what are we
I'm sorry to
adjusting?
interrupt the answer to Karen's question.
Go ahead, let's hear more. Go ahead.
I think every staff around the league, at any league, they're working through things during the bye week, and you obviously have your identity and what you want to be, and how you can get there is some things you can improve during the bye week. So we want to continue to improve every week, and then obviously in the bye week too. But now it's kind of focused on the Jets and how can we get ready for this game. So definitely good to do that, and look at yourself like we talked about earlier, and then obviously as a team and as an offense, defense, special teams. So you get a chance to kind of do that audit.
Do that audit.
Doesn't everyone love to do an
We love
audit?
that audit.
Fun.
Well, I haven't heard
That
from
is
you,
what I look
Arcand.
forward
I'm
to.
getting audited?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Oh,
Yeah, so
thank
Arcand,
God, I needed this.
Fourier always talks about the bye week. You kind of look at what we do well. We look at what we don't do well. Let's throw out the stuff we don't do well. Try to find out more things that we do well. We asked this question. I'll ask you right now. What does this team do well 9 weeks into it?
Defense.
How about
That's
offensively?
It. They play
Okay,
defense.
what does
On
the offense do well?
Ramondre Stevenson's a pretty good runner, and Jacoby Myers, I think, has had a pretty decent season, all things considered. And other than that, I don't really think anything works in this offense. And a lot of things last year did work in the offense. The Hunter Henry, Mac Jones connection in the red zone was a great thing. I thought that was something they'd really build on this year. I thought the trick play Aguilar, was a decent deep threat. It wasn't great. Myers was pretty good last year. I think that there were a lot of things that worked. Harris had a good year. And Stevenson, you could tell there was something there. Almost all of those things, other than Stevenson and Myers getting open over the middle, have completely fallen by the wayside and are just not. It almost seems like not even part of the offense anymore. So yeah, that's what they do well. Stevenson's a good utility player; he can do a lot of things. Myers is a good possession receiver, and that's it.
Yeah, it's. I am curious to see. I think I'm just as much as I'm curious to see what kind of what Zach Wilson shows up, because against you he's a complete disaster, like a complete disaster. And then against Buffalo he did everything. You're like, oh my God, why didn't you just throw it away? Well, he did that against Buffalo.
Yeah. He didn't have great numbers, but he didn't throw those horrible interceptions.
Yeah, and I think it's if you're overconfident about this game on Sunday, I think you're making a mistake. I think you're like Wiggy, thinking you can win that catch off easily. Because again, if it wasn't for a stupid play, a late hit from a defensive lineman, which did not affect that interception, you are down 17-3, maybe going into halftime, and you are not coming back. This team coming back could make things worse. I think you were a bad play. It was the right call. It was just a stupid late hit. You were a stupid late hit away from maybe being blown out in New York, actually, the way your offense works.
It's a cliche, but the Jets lost that game more than you won it. Like that's just how the exact way of a game it was.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. Let's hear from Matt Hasselbeck, because this is a guy that's been around the league, has been a quarterback, has had a lot of different types of coaches, right? Defensive coaches, offensive coaches. And last night he sat down with Mutt, who's with Fourier, and Dakota from Braintree, as a matter of fact, as well. And I believe they asked him, about like what it might be like for a guy like Mac Jones to go from Josh McDaniels to a defensive-minded Matt Patricia.
Listen, I've equated it many times to like when I had Mike Holmgren for most of my career. Started in Green Bay with Mike Holmgren. I had offensive coaches a lot of the time, but I've also had some defensive coaches. I've had Pete Carroll as a head coach. I've had Jim Mora as a head coach. I've had Ray Rhodes as a head coach. Chuck Pagano as a head coach. It's different when you have a defensive coach as your head coach. They sit in those quarterback meetings and they offer a ton of wisdom and a ton of like a different way to look at things. Their perspective is really important. But at the end of the day, you need somebody with the quarterback's perspective, somebody who understands what it's like to be under center and then all of a sudden dropping back exactly 7.5 yards behind that center and what it looks like from that vantage point. I just don't know if they have that right now. And, maybe they do, but I don't think they do. And I think that matters. Again, when I think of the New England Patriots, I think of a team that's always been one step ahead of everybody else. And when I look at them now, I kind of feel like this is a team that's just sort of learning as they go, learning on the fly, on the job training. And, it's just unusual because it hasn't been the case with this team. And I think that's where they're at. And they've got a young quarterback that I believe in. I just don't think he's playing up to his potential right now.
I think that's fair. They look like a team that's learning on the fly.
Can we go back to the earlier part where he's talking about he's had coaches who come from both sides of the ball. And defensive coaches, the way that we've heard Bill Belichick say, I agree with this, that they come in and they offer a different perspective, and they know football, they know the game, and they know coaching, and they know all of that. But when you're a young quarterback and a developing quarterback, the way that Mac Jones is, absolutely you need somebody with a sense of developing a quarterback, a sense of running the offense, a sense of being under center. Who is that on this staff right now? I actually don't think we've talked about that enough. I'm so glad that Hasselbeck brought that up with Mutt and Fourier last night, because we've talked about, going from the defensive side of the ball to the offensive side is Matt Patricia and what he can bring and what he's lacking and everything. But the actual development of the quarterback, who's there besides Brian Hoyer, his teammate? Who's actually talking
teaching
to
the
him?
other coaches how to run the offense?
Yeah, who's actually talking to him and helping him along? It seems like Joe Judge tries, but who's Joe Judge? He's a special teams coach.
See, it's something.
Before that, he was a linebacker coach.
Yes, it's something, Arcand, that this is the NFL, and I know that it's commonplace. I just don't know. Coming from a baseball background, I can't imagine being taught hitting from somebody that when I'm talking to him saying, listen, man, I can't right now for some reason I can't get to this fastball in. And to him to know exactly what I'm going through, that feeling, because everybody has felt with failure in baseball. There's always, no matter who you are, or I can't stay back on this, or I can't get on top of this. And it's well, I've always had somebody that says, you know what, when that was me, this is what I thought of. And this is and whether it's just tricking your mind, whether it's, raise your hands a little bit, and it's just and then you don't even know you're doing it, because it's body and muscles working together. But having somebody in there that stepped in the box, that can work me through it, that mentally knows what I'm going through, I can't imagine having a former pitcher be my hitting coach. And in football, they do this all the time. In baseball, it's usually pitching coaches are usually former pitchers.
Right.
And that's not always the case.
Managers are former catchers.
But in football, it seems like they're very rarely, unless you're the Detroit Lions. I know Troy Brown is here in Mayo and everything, but very rarely former players teaching the position, and they know exactly what these guys are going through on game day.
No, and that's a big problem. And I think that, the offensive coordinator doesn't have to be an old quarterback, right? I mean, there's a lot of good offensive coordinators, guys from the, McVay tree and the Shanahan tree.
That's a different sport.
Right?
It
and
is
they can run an offense, and that's fine. The quarterback's coach, though? The quarterback's coach has to have some sort of experience there, and he doesn't either.
It's
neither
not
of
even
them
just
do.
that. Does anybody on that side of the ball have experience with quarterbacking or coaching quarterbacks, not at the head coach level? Because I know people will say, oh, well, Joe Judge, Matt Patricia, they're head coaches. They oversee everything. Isn't that the ultimate experience? Not really. When you have to develop one individual player, not really. And you can point to it and say, well, Bill Belichick, doesn't he meet with Mac Jones every week? And didn't he help develop Tom Brady? Well, he helped develop Tom Brady with some of the greatest offensive minds in the NFL in the last 20 years.
Yeah. And
you can't always point to the best quarterback in the history of the league and say, well, it worked with that guy, so why doesn't it work with the 24-year-old quarterback you just drafted?
And it goes with, I know Fourier was talking about it yesterday, of sort of this, Bill just kind of feeding us whatever he wants us to believe. Because you remember in the offseason, it was listen, they're playing chess. They get a defensive coach. Of course he can be the offensive mind because he sees it from the other side. He knows how to stop offenses. So this defensive mind is going to be this, offensive coach that can
much,
help
by the way.
and attack it. And you're sitting there going, yeah, it's such genius that nobody in the league has ever done it. You know what I mean? No one's ever tried it. Like Rex Ryan ain't coming back as an offensive coordinator. Like some of the great defensive minds, like Josh McDaniels, when he gets fired, he's not going to come back as a defensive coordinator. He's going to come back as an offensive coordinator. And you can use that same philosophy and say, well, Josh is a great offensive mind. He knows what offenses are trying to do, so he'd make a great defensive coordinator because he knows how to stop it. And it's like on paper that sounds good, but nobody is doing it. And you, I think, right now are seeing why. Because it doesn't work, right? I just don't think it works.
You know, I honestly feel like, and this might, you guys can tell me if you feel like I'm way off base here. I honestly feel like as a rookie, the way that Mac carried himself, played, was able to get the team to carry the team in some instances the way that he did, I think he might have been a victim of his own success. I honestly think that Bill looked at him as a guy who was maybe he thought he was years beyond the progress that he actually had made. And that's not to discount or say that Mac wasn't great or doesn't have potential or anything. But I think that he looked at him and said, wow, this kid gets it so quickly. He picks up things so quickly. He does this all, he came in essentially a pro.
That even if I change everything.
Right, that he can handle this. He can handle what I throw at him. He's already advanced, He's already, we'll figure this out for this year, and then the following year we'll do something else. And I think that, that it's just a victim of his own circumstances, and now we're seeing what happens when you really don't take care of and invest in a second-year quarterback the way that most people would.
Do you guys see Matt Cassel's quarterback rankings?
I did.
After week 11? He currently has Mac Jones 28th.
That high.
And that's not exaggeration, Arcand, all as much, and I'm serious. If you are basing it on potential, if you are basing it off of what he can be, if you are factoring in what's surrounding him and the coaching staff and the scheme and everything else, okay. But if you're strictly looking at raw numbers, he's probably more like 30, 31. 30. As far as starting quarterbacks go. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
When if you were out of this market, I'm sure you'd bring up the coaching staff and everything else, but if you just looked at his play, I don't know how you can put him above, Andy Dalton. He has him. Or Davis Mills.
Numbers
he has him above him.
Yeah, which, by the way, I mean, that's the only quarterback, I guess, other than Trey Lance, who was drafted 2 years ago that he's ahead of, is Davis Mills. His projected numbers this season, we're at the halfway point. It's a good time to point out something like this. 66% completion percentage, 2,153 yards, which he was injured, so fine. 8 touchdowns, 13 picks, and a 76 passer rating. That is such a tremendous crash and burn from last year.
That's overall.
Yeah.
Okay, just make sure
Overall,
we're not talking about the last
those
8
are
games.
his projected
8
numbers. 8 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. He's at 4-7 right now.
I know. It's just.
I mean, Zach Wilson has. I don't think he's been very good. Kenny Pickett obviously hasn't been very good, and he's got Baker Mayfield in here because he's announced now he's going to start this weekend. So But I don't know. I just look at it and I see Andy Dalton and Davis Mills behind him. And
yeah.
I'm
So for the
Andy
listeners,
Dalton's not great, but your guy statistically is much worse than him.
Out of the 32, Jones is at 28. He's followed by Dalton at 29, Davis Mills at 30, Pickett at 31, and Baker Mayfield is dead last at 32.
By the way, Baker Mayfield, cautionary tale. Great
Absolutely.
rookie year. Much better than Max. His rookie year is the rookie of the year. Looked like he was going to have a great career. Now he's number 32. He can barely get on the field in Carolina.
Yeah.
That's the way it can go sometimes, unfortunately.
The list is a little bit wacky, though, which I think it's got to be.
Overall. I mean, look.
Which it's got to be, right? It's a list, so you got to have somebody talking about it.
I feel like the 20 and below, the 20 to 32 kind of makes sense. Above that, it gets pretty squirrely. It gets pretty weird.
I mean, do we really believe that Garoppolo's better than Aaron Rodgers?
He has Garoppolo at 11, and he has Rodgers at 12.
And that's what I mean. Is this based
and then
on numbers
he has
or what
Dak
he
at
thinks?
13.
Yeah, what he thinks, right? Is it what he thinks? Is he factoring in everything? You know what I mean? Or is it strictly how these guys are playing this year? And quite frankly, Rodgers isn't playing well, I guess.
No.
So, maybe that's one of those
He might be
cases
high.
where he might just be looking at numbers. But if he is, Mac Jones, 28. And we're debating whether that's too high. Some people might say that's too low. I don't know, but your boy Taylor Heineke's probably playing better than he is, isn't he?
He played better on Monday Night Football, but, I mean, we don't have to circle back on that. I want to ask you, he has Tua at number 7. How do you feel about that spot?
Yeah, I think it's right.
You think it's exactly right?
Yeah.
I think he'd be higher.
Yeah, I think
maybe a
he
little
You
actually
could put him
should
up
be
above
higher.
Burrow, maybe.
I'd put him
Geno
above-
Smith
I mean,
at 4 is pretty bold.
Got to put him above Geno Smith.
Yeah.
I mean, Geno Smith's a great story and all, but
Tua's
right now,
an MVP candidate.
Yeah,
He's
right
probably
now
a front runner.
Tua. I mean, it's tough to put Tua ahead of Mahomes, Hurts, or
And
Josh
Hurts,
Allen.
yeah.
You know what I mean? But I'd probably have him in that 4 spot right now with how he's playing. I mean, like you said, he's an MVP. Every time the guy wins and finishes a game, they win the game.
Yep.
Period. I mean, it's like the definition of MVP. They've lost 3 games. One of them he got knocked out, and the other 2 he didn't play.
It was Bridgewater, and then the third, Steamin' Willie Beeman played the other one.
Yeah, that's Willie Beeman. So, I mean, yeah, Tua right now, probably, I think I'd move him up to 4 when you start looking at the way the quarterbacks, I just can't put him up against the top 3. And those other 3 guys are deserving.